August 7th, 1945. Dawn breaks over South Bend, but the world feels different. The morning air is thick with news too large to fully comprehend. It's the morning after the United States dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and the pages of the South Bend Tribune are struggling to capture the scale of what has happened. Words fail, facts twist. The blast, brighter than the sun, hotter than fire, has turned an entire city to ash. But how big was it really? How powerful? The Tribune predicts a swift Japanese surrender, speculates that Tokyo could be the next city to be hit. Rambling articles try, and fail, to break down the sophisticated science behind the weapon. One report guesses, incorrectly, that the bomb might have weighed just 10 pounds. It was actually 10,000. Closer to home, the paper reaches for local connections, printing photographs of the atom smasher at the University of Notre Dame built in 1941. A salacious headline teases, "Role of ND in new bomb held secret." The front page is filled with uncertainty, fear, and awe. But now, let's flip past the war headlines, past the grainy photos of obliterated city blocks, past the speculation and secrecy. Let's flip over to the sports page. Because the night before, on the very same day that the bombing of Japan loudly announced the coming end of World War II, South Bend Blue Sox hurler Betty Luna pitched the game of her life, a no-hitter at Bendix Field. It was the greatest pitching performance South Bend had ever seen, and in a world on the brink of irreversible change, at least for one night, in one ballpark, the moment still belonged to baseball. Hello and welcome to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum in South Bend. I'm your host, Aaron Helman, and during this series, we are going to dive into the history of the South Bend Blue Sox, possibly the most storied franchise in the brief but shining history of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. During the course of this episode, you'll hear fictional advertisements for very real historical companies and products. We do that to help break up the podcast, provide some levity, to include just a little more history than we could otherwise, and to give you a sense of the time and place when and where all of this is happening. The absence of actual paid advertising is made possible by the generous underwriting of the entire series by the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League Players Association. And now, with all that out of the way, let's catch up with the South Bend Blue Sox of 1944 and 1945 during the last 2 years of World War II, in a women's league that remained in a state of flux. The newspapers painted the league as a success, with thousands of fans and positive reception wherever they went. But financially, it was a different story. Philip Wrigley had fronted half the cost for each team, and South Bend's business community was on the hook for the rest, a payout framed as a patriotic duty during the years when it looked like baseball might go away. The only way to recoup those funds was in ticket sales, and while attendance was good, it wasn't enough to turn a profit. South Bend was hemorrhaging $25,000 a year on the Blue Sox until 1946, despite the rosy picture painted in the sports pages. But the women on the field couldn't concern themselves too much with the happenings off of it. There were practices and doubleheaders and train rides that were about to fill their summers all over again. We'll start in 1944 with a Blue Sox squad that was eager to find redemption. The season before, South Bend had faded down the stretch during both halves of the season, twice relinquishing first place a week before they would have been able to secure a playoff spot. But in 1944, they had more experience. They returned their manager, and most importantly, they brought back their entire core. All of the league's players were summoned to Chicago a few weeks before the season began for intense training, and a special emphasis was given to sliding lessons. Many of the players didn't slide well, and the ones who did slide well often didn't want to. given that they were wearing short skirts. Players like South Bend's Lois Flash Florike opted to barrel into the bag like a runaway train, shoulder down, head of steam, cloud of dust. Base running was the most dangerous part of the women's game, and given that the teams carried thin rosters, the league was interested in cutting down on those injuries. So they brought in Max Carey, himself a former South Bend ball player, to teach the women how to slide. Carey's professional debut had come with the South Bend Greens in 1909 before he moved on to a long and successful big league career. It would have been hard to find a better sliding coach for the women than Max Carey. He stole more bases in the National League than any other player until the 1970s. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1961. Carey would also come on to manage the Milwaukee Chicks, one of two teams new to the circuit in 1944. The other new squad was the Minneapolis Millerettes. So there were new teams, and there were also new rules. The mound had been pushed back a little bit. The base paths were a little longer. The ball was a half-inch smaller. It was still fast-pitch softball, but with every passing year, it became a little more like baseball. The teams themselves started to gain a little more autonomy. Even though players still signed contracts with the league and not with individual teams, the role of team leadership became more important. The Blue Sox built an 8-man board of directors and appointed investment banker Al McGann of McGann Securities as the team's president. McGann was the youngest son of funeral home operator James H. McGann, and by the time the 1940s and 1950s rolled around, his family was already a South Bend institution. The new board of directors moved quickly, and their first action was to vote to bring Bert Niehoff back as the team's manager. As for the players, the league was still in the business of assigning players to teams' opening day rosters, but after that, it was up to management to field the best team possible. Players could be released, traded, and picked up as the season progressed. In South Bend, and in each of the other 5 AAG PBL cities, that happened quite a bit. There was another round of tryouts in Chicago to fill the empty spots on the new teams, and a handful of empty spots on the old ones. At the end of that process, players signed their contracts. Rookies got $50 a week, and second-year players got $65. Then the Blue Sox left the Windy City and boarded a train for South Bend. For some of them, it was like returning home. For others, it was a brand new adventure. One of those new players was Vicky Panos, a 24-year-old left-handed Canadian outfielder, the only player on the Blue Sox who was married, and one of only 2 women in the league to be a mother. Panos didn't last long with the squad. Manager Bert Niehoff waived her after just 2 weeks, and it would prove to be a costly mistake. Panos would go on to be one of the best hitters on the circuit in 1944. But the Blue Sox had plenty more talent, and they started the season on a tear, racing out to an early first-place lead, their momentum only stalled by the postponement of games on D-Day, June 6, 1944. The league had done the Blue Sox a favor when it assigned new players to their teams, addressing one of the weak spots in South Bend's roster when they sent over Charlotte skipper Armstrong, an 18-year-old Texan who pitched one of the better fastballs in the league. With a promising third pitcher, Niehoff and the Blue Sox wouldn't have to lean so hard on Berger and Barr throughout the early season, and maybe this time they'd be able to avoid slumping out of the playoffs. But not during the first half of the season. They relinquished a 5-game hold on first place during the month of June, dropping 25 of their last 35 games ahead of the mid-season break. The Blue Sox finished the first half in second place, and for the third consecutive half season, they'd faltered mightily to drop there. None of it was a surprise to Bert Niehoff, who was revealed to have predicted such a result before the season even started. Niehoff had told the Tribune that he thought his team would get off to a hot start, but that other clubs would catch them by the end. Why did he think that? I'll let him explain it. We have several players who don't have the ability to play in our league, but they've been sent back to us again this year, and we'll have to make do with what we have. Niehoff didn't name names, but given that only 11 players had returned from the year before, and that everyone knew exactly which of those 11 he wasn't talking about, it didn't take a genius to ascertain which of his players he was referring to. And of course, by predicting his team's downfall from the start, he didn't exactly show a lot of belief in his squad's potential. Team morale took a hit, and a soap opera played out in the newspapers. The team's bats went cold during the second half of the season, but they were buoyed by their excellent pitching and managed to stay toward the top of the standings, at least until August. During a particularly bad week, the team only managed to score 3 runs across 8 games. The team hit freefall and plummeted out of first place all over again. The newspaper called them the bridesmaids after finishing in second place for the 4th consecutive period and missing the 1944 playoffs the same way they had in 1943. The South Bend Blue Sox had the best record in the league across its first 2 seasons, but they had nothing to show for it. Bert Niehoff, maybe as a result of his comments or maybe as a result of his results, would not be retained as manager the next season. The Blue Sox would need to try something else if they were going to bring a championship to South Bend.
Looking for the easiest way to get across town? How about a bus piloted by a skilled driver with Northern Indiana Transit Incorporated? And now, your bus ride is more comfortable than ever, with no smoking allowed on city buses. Buses run to every nook and cranny of South Bend, so do your part to conserve fuel with us and ride the bus. And now, back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
Of all the players in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, South Bend Blue Sox catcher Bonnie Baker might have been the most All-American of them all, except for the part where she was actually Canadian. Baker was a star on the diamond, a 5-tool player who could field, throw, hit for power, and run the bases. Besides that, she had at least one more tool that was important to the early growth of the league. Baker was drop-dead gorgeous. Baker was a model in California before she was a ball player, and she continued to work as a model in the off-season from baseball, or maybe she played baseball in the off-season from modeling. Even though all of the characters in A League of Their Own were specifically fictitious, it has been bandied, and is probable, that Gina Davis's character Dottie Hinson was based on the Blue Sox catcher. Bonnie Baker attracted a following around South Bend almost immediately, and she became a celebrity who spawned a brand new group of male fans called heroin worshippers. If word got out that Baker was at the soda fountain at the Philadelphia to enjoy a Coke, a legion of young men would suddenly turn up to catch a glimpse of their muse, to make small talk, and to hope to catch her eye. If Baker indulged them with anything more than friendliness, it never made it into the historical record, and anything else would have been something less than All-American. Baker had been one of the inaugural Blue Sox in that 1943 season, but as the 1945 campaign loomed, the team was changing, the league was changing, and so was the entire world. World War II wasn't over yet, but it was on its way there. Philip Wrigley had started the Women's League as a hedge against a bet that Major League Baseball might be shut down completely. When it became apparent that that wasn't going to happen, he lost interest in the Women's League and sold it to Chicago advertising executive Arthur Meyerhoff. Meyerhoff's first action was to decentralize control of the league, allowing teams to choose and sign players rather than the league assigning players to teams. He also allowed players to negotiate their own contracts, and then named former South Bend baseball star Max Carey as president of the circuit. Teams changed cities. The Milwaukee Chicks moved to Grand Rapids. The Minneapolis Millerettes moved to Fort Wayne. A rival women's league had also sprung up, the National Girls Baseball League, this one also out of Chicago. They poached a few players by offering higher salaries, and poached even more when the leagues began to enunciate their differences. The All-American Girls League was tiptoeing ever closer toward a product that more resembled men's baseball. Indeed, 1945 would be the last year for underhand pitching in the AAGPBL. As a result, many of the league's best underhand pitchers bailed for the National League, afraid that they would be cast out of an evolving senior circuit. For Bonnie Baker, that meant the loss of Sonny Berger, who jumped ship after the 1944 season. Baker and Berger had been the most fearsome battery in the league during their 2 campaigns together. That wasn't the only change to hit South Bend ahead of the 1945 season. Bert Niehoff was out as manager and replaced by Marty McManus, a 15-year big league veteran who'd received MVP votes in 5 seasons and even spent a stint as a player-manager for the Boston Red Sox. Then, there was the matter of the players themselves. Bonnie Baker had been one of 15 players on that inaugural South Bend Blue Sox team. By the start of the 1945 season, only 5 of them remained. By the end of 1945, there would be just 3. Baker, Betsy Jochum, and Marge Stefani. Stefani was an infielder from Detroit who played at first, second, third, and shortstop for the Blue Sox, batting a very respectable .227 for her career and swiping more than 300 bags across 6 seasons. Betsy Sochum Jochum batted .258 for her career and stole more than 350 bases, 127 of those during the 1944 campaign. As the only players to remain with South Bend throughout the war years, they became beloved throughout the city. For her part, after retiring as a player, Marge Stefani returned as the team's chaperone for 2 seasons in 1949 and 1950. As for Jochum, when the team traded her to Peoria after the 1948 season, she retired from the game rather than leave South Bend. She never left the city and worked as a junior high PE teacher until retiring from that gig in 1983. Baker, Jochum, and Stefani would be the only thing steady about the team in 1945. A squad that made moves at a frenetic pace, all of it designed to shake up a team that had slid out of the playoff race late across 4 consecutive half seasons. On that front, at least there was perhaps some good news. In 1945, the league did away with the schedule that split the season into 2 parts. Beginning in 1945, there would be 1 season, and the teams with the top 4 records would make the playoffs. We'll catch up with that 1945 season right after the break.
Come out to Melody Gardens at Playland Park for a Saturday night dance sponsored by the St. Joseph Valley Food Dealers Association. Enjoy music from Bobby Wares and his 11-piece orchestra. Just 60 cents per person, and everyone is welcome. And now, back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
For the first time in 3 seasons, the Blue Sox did not start hot out of the gates, and even though it was a long season, Marty McManus was not predisposed to being patient with his squad. He was as active off the field as he was on it, making a series of roster moves that were not always popular with the players on the field or the fans in the stands. His first move was to release pitcher Dodie Barr. Barr had been a star pitcher for her first 2 seasons in the league, but when she got off to a slow start in 1945, McManus cut her loose. That was a mistake. Barr would be eagerly snatched up by the Racine Bells, and she quickly turned things around, winning 20 games, a career high, and pitching to a 1.71 ERA, a career low. She threw a no-hitter for Racine and would become a crucial member of that squad during their championship run a year later. But what was done was done. The team still had other quality pitchers in Charlotte Armstrong, Betty Luna, and Nalda Birdie Bird. They just needed to score some runs to help those pitchers out, and more often than not, they couldn't. Armstrong, Luna, and Bird did everything they could, but with the squad's anemic offense, they had to be perfect to win. Sometimes they were perfect. Luna threw that no-hitter on the same day that Americans tried to figure out just what an atom bomb was and what that meant for the war. Armstrong once pitched shutouts in both halves of a doubleheader. Not to be outdone, so did Bird. Bird also pulled double duty as one of her league's biggest cheerleaders, composing the league's victory song along with LaVon Pepper Pear Davis, and here are the lyrics of that classic anthem.
Batter up, hear that call, the time has come for one and all to play ball. We're the members of the All-American League. We come from cities near and far. We've got Canadians, Irishmen and Swedes. We're all for one, we're one for all. We're all American. Each girl stands, her head so proudly high. Her motto, do or die. She's not the one to use or need an alibi. Our chaperones are not too soft, they're not too tough. Our managers are on the ball. We've got a president who really knows his stuff. We're all for one, we're one for all. We're all American.
Unfortunately, if that was the league's victory song, the 1945 Blue Sox wouldn't have much occasion to sing it. The team's pitchers were not able to dominate opposing teams quite as often as opposing pitchers dominated their own offense. McManus set to shake things up all over again. He traded away 2 more of the original Blue Sox and 2 of the most popular players on the team. Lois Floreyk was known all over the league and especially in South Bend as the toughest bulldog in the circuit. She ran players over, broke up double plays, and barreled into catchers with abandon. The joke around town was that she trained with Notre Dame linebackers in the offseason and that the linebackers got the worst of it. But after Floreyk made a crucial error against Grand Rapids, McManus shipped her off alongside another of the team's most popular players, Dottie Schroeder. Schroeder had been the youngest player in the league when she arrived in that first training camp with the Blue Sox at the age of 15. She would go on to be the only player in the history of the league to play in each of its seasons. In South Bend, she was known for slick defense, even if she carried a light stick at the plate. More than that, she was extremely popular on account of her youth, her beauty, and her glove. The moves were not popular, but it seemed like they might have worked. The team rallied, and by the middle of July, they were firmly in second place all over again. Only this time, second place was good enough for the playoffs. And then the bottom fell out. Stop me if you've heard this before, but injuries decimated the back half of the Blue Sox season. They slipped in the standings once, and then they slipped again. With 2 weeks to go in the season, they were clinging tenuously to 4th place and the league's final playoff spot. And then something happened. We don't know what it was, and the team's leadership was tight-lipped about the incident. But with 10 games to go, the team suspended 2 of its top 3 pitchers for the duration of the season, Betty Luna and Nalda Bird. The officially named transgression was insubordination. Although given the expectations of the All-American girls, that suspension could have been for anything from drinking a beer in public, to sneaking boys into their host home, to breaking curfew. Whatever it was, it doomed the rest of the season. It had been a theme that South Bend's exhausted pitchers would collapse down the stretch, and it would happen all over again in 1945. Charlotte Armstrong tried to carry the load of 3 women, but she broke down in a hurry, and a parade of backups watched the season go up in flames. South Bend finished in 5th place, 1 slot out of the playoffs, for the 3rd consecutive season and for the 5th period in a row. Now, with the war ending, the future of the league was in question. The team moved into the offseason without ever having made a playoff, and no one was sure if they would ever get another chance. Hey, thanks for joining us on A Bend in Time presented by the History Museum in South Bend. There's more history waiting for you at historymuseumsb.org, and if you want to know anything else about the All-American League, the History Museum should be your first stop. The History Museum serves as the national repository for the AAG PBL Players Association. I'm your host, Aaron Helman. The theme music is Whose Distance Is It Anyway by Neil Carmichael. Tune in for our next episode as the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League reinvents itself all over again. There will be roster upheaval, dramatic trades, overhand pitching, and once again, the South Bend Blue Sox will make a run at the playoffs. I hope you'll tune in for that one next. And remember, everything is fascinating as long as you stay curious.